Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Dr. Suzanne McDonald. I'm RCIScience Chair. Thanks for your patience. We had a few technical difficulties, all figured out now. We're very glad that you're joining us today on what feels like kind of a winter day in Toronto, if you're in the Toronto area. With Toronto in mind, we're going to do a land acknowledgement from Toronto, but we acknowledge that, of course, many of you may be across the country. We acknowledge the land we're meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. As I mentioned, we know you're from across Canada and beyond, so we suggest that you research the history of the place you are on using the website and app native-land.ca. Well, I hope you've got a snack and a beverage ready because we're talking about the future of food and what could be more interesting than that. We have a great panel today moderated by René-Claude Goulet from the Canada Agriculture and Food Museum. Each of our three panelists will present a short presentation before tackling your questions. You can submit your questions and comments in the chat box or comments via Twitter at RCIScience or email to information@rciscience.ca. And just a reminder to be polite and respectful. We do have monitors monitoring the chat box and the comments and taking action as appropriate. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today, René-Claude Goulet. René-Claude is a passionate science communicator with over a decade of experience interpreting the science and technology behind agriculture and food for non-expert audiences. She's the science advisor at the Canada Agriculture and Food Museum, where she applies her expertise creating educational opportunities and presentations for museum audiences, researching and reviewing content for exhibitions and programs, and writing for the Ingenium channel. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Biology and a Bachelor of Education in Science, and she's an Ontario certified teacher. Take it away, René-Claude.
Well, thank you, Suzanne, for this great intro. So I'm really excited about the topic today. It's something that ties to all of us, really, since we all need to eat every day. We don't really have to look very far for new food technologies. So for example, the meat alternatives we're finding in our stores now that look and often taste like real meat, and even things like greenhouses that are providing us fresh local produce, such as tomatoes, peppers, and cucumbers year round, even in a place like Canada where we have our long winters and we can't grow those things outside. So there's technologies all around us in agriculture. We might not always realize it. A little about me. I grew up in Northern Ontario in a small farming town, lots of dairy farms there. So agriculture's always been part of my life, but I can't say I really thought about agriculture and food production much until I started my studies in university in biology. And I became really interested in sustainability and then the role of agricultural production in all of that, and the role of technologies in the equation. So that kind of led me to be curious about this museum here in Ottawa, the Agriculture and Food Museum, where I started to work. And it became really obvious to me how agriculture and food production has just always been in evolution. It's never been a stasis. What we're seeing today is a snapshot in time, and it'll be completely different tomorrow as we adapt to find new ways to produce our food, to meet our needs, and do it more efficiently, while also trying to improve welfare of livestock and workers who work in the agricultural industry. Not only that, but also improving the nutritional quality of our food and reducing the distances they travel. So there's technologies that play in all of that. So I'm really interested that we're looking at the future today. As our world population grows, well, so does our need for food. But simultaneously, we're facing a climate crisis. It's not a secret, and this is impacting agricultural production all around the world. We're seeing increased droughts, more pests. We're also seeing torrential rains causing flooding, like, for example, what happened in BC recently. New diseases, and their ranges are changing. So because it's becoming warmer in some climates, pests now have access to areas they might not have before. All of this with shrinking land resources. So our soils that are actually able to produce food are degrading. We're burying them under cities. So urbanization is a large problem. And so we have less food, we need more food, or sorry, we have less land, we need more food. And then we also face things like pandemics, as we just experienced, and wars that cause disruption in our food system. So thinking about the future of food also includes, thinking about all of these other factors that are part of our food system, and how food technology can help us face these new problems that we're facing. So as we look at food security now in the future, sustainability is central to the equation. Not only do we need to feed ourselves, but we need to do it in a way that minimizes the impact on the environment, that increases the resiliency of our food systems in when there's unforeseen world events. And when we think about sustainability, it's also important to think about the possible unintended consequences of all of these great technologies that might be helping us. If there's any other fans of sci-fi literature out there, you might have been familiar with all the different ways that authors and creatives have been thinking about the future of food. So today it's really exciting to talk to scientists who are experts in the field. And on a final, professional note, for us at the Agriculture and Food Museum, for the next 5 years, we're looking at food security really keenly. And for me, that really involves looking at and understanding the future technologies and what's coming up. But I'm always amazed and just flabbergasted and surprised at the technologies and innovations that are coming up. And it's giving me hope. It's also making my imagination run wild. So again, really excited for this talk. And I'm going to finish talking on my end here, and I'll start introducing our first speaker. So we have Dr. Thomas Graham. Dr. Thomas Graham is an assistant professor in the School of Environmental Sciences and holds a Phyto-Grow research chair in controlled environment systems at the University of Guelph. He completed a prestigious postdoctoral research fellowship at NASA's Kennedy Space Center and returned to the University of Guelph, where he continues to develop an interdisciplinary controlled environment agriculture research and teaching program. His research covers topics such as bioregenerative life support for human space exploration, northern and remote community food insecurity, urban agriculture, and medical crops. Thomas is also active in STEM outreach activities through programs like Tomato Sphere. Really love that program. So without further ado, I'd like to pass the mic over to Thomas, who's going to take us through a little bit about indoor vertical farming and perhaps other things. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me all right? We'll do a tech check here. Hopefully you can hear me all right. Is that a yes? Perfect. Excellent. All right. So today I just want to probably chew into quite a bit of my time here, but just throw some images by you. And I want you, as they go by, just think, consider them as sort of the broader context of what we'll be getting in today, talking about controlled environment agriculture. So basically anything that's not outside. And I'm going to try to make the sound work. Let's see how this goes. Everything's better with an epic soundtrack, right? Bear with me while I try and get my speakers back. All right, another sound check because I just changed everything. Still good? All right, so today I'm going to be jumping around a bit, and I don't have a lot of time to dig deeply into a lot of things, but I want to talk basically about controlled environment agriculture and urban farming, vertical farming, it's all sorts of things as we'll get into, and hopefully show you that there's a lot of opportunity to be realized in what I'm calling an agricultural identity crisis. Right. So this slide again is just another attempt to show you the diversity of things that fall under the umbrella term of controlled environment agriculture. It ranges certainly food, but also a wide assortment of medicine, flowers, and it can help address food insecurity across the planet and other planets, as we'll find out. So I'd like to start by what it isn't. You get a lot of talk about vertical farms or indoor greenhouses. They're not going to replace field cropping. Absolutely not. They are not going to do that. And that's never been the claim of anyone in the industry. Controlled environment agriculture complements and augments field production as we move forward, but it is certainly not a replacement. So just ignore that argument. It is also not this. These notions of skyscrapers in the sky, growing plants, if it is to become a reality, that is so far down the road that, well, I'll bleed longworm food. It's not this either. So don't get caught up in the millions of images you can see on Google if you Google vertical farming. But there are a lot of reasons to grow plants in a box or in a greenhouse. And hopefully we'll speed through a bunch of them today, but we can certainly pick up on them in the question period. Perhaps the biggest is weather. Weather's a real pain in the butt when it comes to trying to grow things predictably. You get situations like this roll in. Even the most novice grower will know that these aren't ideal growing conditions. Can't be avoided though. Nor can a bunch of other things. So I've already mentioned weather, but there's critters, there's bugs, there's pathogens, there's pests, there's all sorts of unknowns, and there's weather. All which are to various degrees unpredictable or uncontrollable. Now you layer climate change on top of that, and all of those things get worse. So how do we deal with that? Well, one thing is to grow things inside. And plants are just amazing things. We can use them for food, medicine, mental health. Pretty flowers always brighten the day. But to grow a plant is integrating its entire environment all the time. And so if we're going to start growing things indoors, we have to control those. Unfortunately, well, if it was easy, I wouldn't have a job. All these things interact and modify one another. So if you change one thing that's influencing a plant, it changes how a plant responds to everything else. So that's a real challenge of growing things indoors. But the challenge is most certainly worth it. And as we move forward, it was already mentioned, food is the big one that we're here today, the future food. There's all lettuce. I have no idea if you can see my mouse, but I'll pretend you can. On my right, there's a medicinal crop. This is a tobacco plant that's used to make drugs. In fact, I am on the Medicago COVID vaccine trial made in this kind of plant. But something else that needs to be considered is when you're growing food, for example, plants respond, that slide I just showed where plants are integrated in their entire environment. Well, they do that and they respond to it. So the image at the bottom of the 3 lettuce plants, those were all grown under the exact same environmental conditions, except the color of the light. One of those variables of all those ones I showed changed, and it results in a dramatically different tasting plant, as well as its nutritional composition. You know, the one that's redder has more antioxidants in it, for example. So there's a lot of things you can do by growing indoors. And again, I'm just going to throw this slide back up to reiterate that there are a lot of things we can do here. So I did want to touch on food insecurity because it's a big one, and it's something that controlled environment agriculture can address in part. It's not the sole solution, obviously, but it can certainly help. And these are just some definitions. I think this is being recorded. You can look at them later, but it's just an idea, just to show that what food insecurity is. And food insecurity is rampant across Canada. But part of my own research program is looking at northern and remote communities, particularly because the logistics chains there are not as reliable. So just one of many examples that are now out. This one is out of Churchill. So aside from polar bears, they now grow greens. So they brought in a controlled environment agriculture system, in this case, a container system, to grow fresh food, because fresh food is hard to get in the middle of winter in Churchill and any other northern or remote community. And I hesitate to throw up a lot of text, but here it is. But the point to take here is you could get a head of lettuce in Churchill for $7. That's a lot more than it is here, and it's by far from fresh. But with this control environment system, even though it's still expensive, she's got the price down to half that, and it's fresh, and hasn't had some of the nutrients degrade. But there's also a neat cultural component to this, and that quote here is, "We've been showing how to people to cook with bok choy. In this case, turns out it goes great with caribou." So there's this opportunity for social broadening of social context and interactions. But one thing I do want to point out is food insecurity, it's not just about filling your belly. It's about our overall health and the cost to all of us. If we ignore food insecurity, it's to our detriment. The graph here on my right, for those that are severely food insecure, the cost to our healthcare system is double, more than double. So food is a medicine in this case. It is part of our healthcare system. Now, we have other projects on the go too, because food insecurity is global. We've worked with the Europeans, lots of consortium with the European Space Agency, in particular the German Space Agency. And the Germans have a research center in the Antarctic, and it suffers from food insecurity. But we're using this also as a space demonstrator. But this is, they're there for 6 to 9 months with nobody coming in. Shelves can get bare. And you need to eat, and you need nutritious, fresh food. So by putting in a growth chamber at great expense, but nonetheless, they have fresh, nutritious food, which provide nutrients that they normally wouldn't get. And it's not limited to -50. It can be done at +50. It's the same problem. It's just a positive instead of a negative. And we've worked with the Quades, for example, who realize they are horribly food insecure. More than 99% of their food is imported. So they've realized that, okay, we better fix that. I also wanted to touch, I mentioned already a little bit about food as medicine, and it is important as we look to the future to make sure that we have safe, but also healthy and nutritious foods. And that can be done with controlled environment agriculture. And we can modify these environments to improve things like nutraceuticals and functional foods. And I remind you of this graph where, yes, food is very much part of our healthcare system. And if we ignore it, the quality of it, the distribution of it, the access to it, it's to our peril and certainly to our great cost. So we need to do better. I just wanted to briefly, and I'm running out of time here, but just briefly touch on, given COVID and all the things we've been dealing with, the potential of using these same technologies, the same food production technologies, to make not only medicine to eat, good, healthy, nutritious food, but also things like vaccine and cancer drugs and all sorts of other very useful things for society. And okay, this one gets a little more controversial, but we have the power to put things directly in our food that are to the betterment of us all. And I'm sure this one will be a lightning rod. It is possible. And just quickly, space, that's another thing that I work in, because space, we're going to send people to the moon and Mars. We've already decided that. Well, they're going to be horribly food insecure. So we need to do something about that. And that is controlled environment agriculture. If anyone's seen The Martian, Matt Damon survived because he had plants and he was able to grow food. And that is the basis of what's called bioregenerative life support. And this is something real, and here it is. But usually I throw this stuff up and get this kind of look. So, but it's far more simpler in concept than that. It is space farming. Growing food inside and controlled environment agriculture is space farming, vertical farming in space, whatever you want to call it. It is, and it's absolutely necessary if we're going to go and live beyond our planet. And it's a pretty straightforward equation. Food in, air in, and water in. Bad air out, pee and poop out. That's how it works. On Earth, that's in a big system, but we can't carry all that stuff with us to space. So to do this, we actually know we have to close those loops and circularize it and make it sustainable. So the goal of doing this in space has immediate benefit to Earth, because if we can do it on the moon, we can most certainly do it on Earth. And that's one of the challenges. And in fact, one of the very first true vertical farms, long before the term existed, was developed by NASA. And this was their biomass production chamber at Kennedy Space Center way back when, where they showed that you can grow 3 or 4 times the amount of wheat compared to field, and you can actually grow potatoes hydroponically and make a very good seed potato, and on and on. Lots of technology transfer. Now, I'm just going to tear through, because I know I've gone way over, but oh well. Some of the things that are a challenge in vertical farming and controlled environment agriculture right now, and energy is one. We are not going to do this sustainably if it's on fossil fuels, and we cannot do it in northern remote communities if it's on diesel. So we've got to figure out the energy question. We need new varieties. We've bred for centuries or more for field production. Field production varieties don't work that well indoors, so we need to adapt and develop new crops. Automation, AI, and robotics, absolutely required. These systems are high tech and expensive to run. And I've got this little X out here, oops, at the bottom. We can't do it with scissor lifts and a lot of human labor. It's just too pricey. These are high tech systems, and we need AI, we need robotics, we need automation. These are big data things. So it is high tech agriculture. And we also need to work on resource management. Currently, there's a lot of waste for a green industry, things that are growing green things. We've got a ways to go yet. And one of the big things we want to try to do, and this is from a student of mine, is close those loops. We've dumped a lot of energy, nutrients, carbon dioxide into these systems to grow the plant, and then we're just going to throw it out. A lot of it, okay, we give some to the consumers, they eat it, but the rest is stuff we've invested in. So let's recapture that. Let's close those loops. And that's just another example of, you can close those loops, but you can also use these farms as a receptacle for other wastes in the urban environment, perhaps. So try to, again, this notion of the circular economy or circular production is at least one of my key areas of research. And since the way over, I'll stop there, but that's all. So thank you for now. And I guess like questions at the end.
Yes, so we'll encourage people to put their questions in the chat, in the comments, and we'll have a little question and answer period at the end. So thank you, Thomas. That was really fascinating. Like, one of the things that really stood up to me was the idea of closed loop systems, like you mentioned at the end, and how that can be applied to the way we currently do things. there's a big issue in terms of waste in agriculture, as you mentioned, and I see really a lot of ways that these future technologies will push us towards doing better here while we're working on the future. Another thing to me was you really highlighted well, I think, the interdisciplinarity that will be needed to move further into the future. Agriculture is, going beyond just working a field and you're a farmer and you have your technologies on the farm. Now we need engineers, mathematicians, technologists of all kinds to make it happen. So thank you for this very insightful talk. So next up, I would like to introduce our next speaker. So Ravi Selvaganapathy is a distinguished engineering professor of mechanical and biomedical engineering at McMaster University and the Canada Research Chair Laureate in biomicrofluidics. His research interests are in microfluidic devices for environmental and medical diagnostics, drug discovery, and artificial organs. He has more than 20 years of extensive experience in micromanufacturing, microfluidics, and materials development, which has resulted in over 150 journal publications, 70 conference publications, 35 invited talks, and 8 patents. In recent years, he has developed several biofabrication methods for cultivated meat production. So really looking forward to hearing a little bit more about lab-grown meat from Dr. Ravi Selvaganapathy. Passing the digital mic over to you.
Thanks, René Claude, for that introduction. All right, so excited to be here presenting on this topic. This is of recent interest in my group. We've been working on this for the past 5 or 6 years or so. Before I start, I'll start with this slide, which is a conflict of interest and a disclaimer slide. I conduct research in this field. My student and I co-founded a startup company in this field. But the views that I present here are solely as my role as an academic and a professor at McMaster University and are not related to the company. All right, I'll start with this slide. So this is from data from Food and Agricultural Organization, and it shows the distribution of per capita consumption of meat more or less 50 or so years ago in 63. So it shows that North America and Western Europe are significant consumers of meat, while the rest of the world wasn't consuming as much. If we move forward about 50 years, what you see is more of red, and therefore the meat consumption has grown significantly over that period of time. If you dig into the data, what you see is that countries such as United States started off at a high point and then went even higher. But then developing economies such as Brazil and China started off low and then are significantly increasing. So as an economy gains more disposable income, what you see is meat consumption automatically go or increase with respect to that. One thing to note is the line on the bottom, that's India. It has so far not taken off as China did in the 1980s. But you would expect that with growing income levels, the meat consumption in India, as well as in several parts of Africa, will also go like that. So what we see is that over the past 50 years, and then likely in the next 50 years, you're going to see dramatic increase in meat consumption. And that has to be sustained through agriculture. But if we look at global land use, out of the habitable land that we have, 50% of it goes towards agriculture. And of that 50%, we see an incredible 77% devoted to livestock, right? So this is land associated with grazing, land associated with plant food production that goes into feeding animals and so on. And therefore, we don't have much capacity to expand beyond what we have right now. And the only way that we can expand is by taking the other 37% of habitable land, which is in forest, and then converting it into farming. And that is what essentially is happening right now. So this is basically Amazon being cleared for soybean cultivation so that it can be fed to produce pork. And this is unsustainable, especially given that we are likely to face an increasing demand for meat as the world becomes more wealthier and there's more income available. So we have to look at other ways of sustaining this demand. In addition to that, there are also other stressors. So in cultivating animals, especially animals which live over and develop over a longer duration of time, like cattle, we consume more water as compared to plants. Animals and animal husbandry is also a significant source of greenhouse gas emission, and larger the animal, more greenhouse gas emissions come out of that. Therefore, there is a possibility that if we can circumvent all of this, if we can lower the water use, lower the greenhouse gas emission, and in particular, lower the amount of land use in cultivating meat, then that is a much more sustainable and a complementary way to farm-grown meat production right now. And so one such solution is cultivating meat in an industrial setting or in a petri dish. So what this can lead to, the advantages of this kind of a solution is that it can lead to intensive cultivation. So the amount of land that you require is going to be considerably lesser. You can cultivate things faster in this kind of a format. And there are also side benefits. So for example, countries such as Singapore, Japan, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, and so on, which are land deficient or they don't have suitable land for cultivation, can potentially use this technology in order to become food secure. Simultaneously, if we can use energy derived not from fossil fuels, but from renewable sources such as solar energy in performing these operations, then we can also reduce greenhouse gases associated with livestock production. And in addition, because this could potentially be a closed loop system, you can basically take water and recycle water and therefore have a minimal impact on the environment and not stress out water resources that are already quite stressed out. So these are all the potential advantages of cultivated meat, and that is what strives us in both academia as well as the number of companies that are out there. So if I look at sort of development of this technology over the past time frame, just give me a minute. What we see is that it all started with academic research. This is an early paper on cultivation of smooth muscle cells into fibers. And then this is another paper where we have cultivation of skeletal muscle cells into myofibers. These were all done on organisms such as guinea pigs and rats, primarily for biomedical research as models to mimic human muscle fibers and to look at diseased and biological conditions. But this technology got some people thinking, in particular William Van Allen, into looking at using this as a way to cultivate meat. And his idea was to grow meat without inflicting pain or sacrificing the animal itself. And he did a lot in the 80s and 90s in advocating this technology be adapted to the cultivated meat area. And in some circles, he's known as the godfather of cultivated meat. He also went on to patent some of these ideas. So this is one from his patent, industrial production of meat from in vitro cell cultures, which sort of explicitly details his vision of where this field could potentially go. The realization of that came about in 2000s, particularly in 2002. So this was, again, a NASA-funded research, and the idea was to look at food supply or meat supply in environments such as Mars or Moon, where access to that or transportation could be quite difficult. So this is from Benjaminson's work, where they cultivated some skeletal muscle cells from goldfish along with fibroblasts. This is two different kinds of cell types that are needed to form that meat, and co-cultured it along with some matrix that are plant derived. So this is a classic forerunner to all the technologies that we are seeing right now, where these elements of combining two different types of cells, as well as having a substrate derived from plants so that we can get a high degree of mass, has already been demonstrated and shown. And on the right, you see some figures of a piece of meat that have been derived in this particular fashion. So all this was good. And this led some other people who were in the tissue engineering space to think of scalability in the production of such cultivated meat. One such person was Vladimir Murnov, then at University of South Carolina, and he wrote a proposal to NASA to look into a scalable way of producing this. And his idea, as shown in the figure on the right, is to start with a biopsy from animals to extract out cells that can be expanded or grown in large numbers, and then subsequently assemble them onto these substrates. He used collagen, for instance, and create these globules of meat-like tissues that can be then combined with traditional food processing technologies to form a minced meat type patty for a hamburger, for instance. Unfortunately, his proposal was rejected. However, this is one of the famous proposals that NASA did reject because it was mentioned in this article by Wendy Wolfson in the New Scientist, and his ideas largely was propagated to the rest of the academic community. One such funding agency which did fund this research was Center Novem in Netherlands. And from 2005 onwards, they funded sort of three kinds of research thrusts in this space. One was in the stem cell biology area, trying to get some cells that could potentially be expanded and cultivated. The other was in tissue engineering to try to form large structures that could look like meat. And then the third one was culture media, try to get lower cost media that can be used to grow these cells. The outcome of that kind of funding, along with some other private funding, was the demonstration of the first ever lab-grown burger by Mark Post, who subsequently took on some of these projects in 2012, 2013 timeframe or so. So that was the first sort of demonstration that this could be done in a reasonably scalable fashion, that we could at least produce one hamburger or meat worth of one hamburger in a lab type setting as compared to a field type setting. And that spurred a lot of action because meat is a very large global industry. That led to a significant amount of venture capital funding, and new startups came about. And so this chart here from Good Food Institute shows the expansion of number of companies that were growing. So in 2015, Mosa Meat was the company that Mark Post started. And then there were a few other companies like Memphis Meat and Just Foods. These companies are still around. But then every year from then on, the number of companies starting up in this space expanded and grew significantly. On the right, you see the graph of the amount of funding that went into this nascent industry that also grew exponentially. And now what you're seeing is newer companies that are formed that specialize in certain areas where there are challenges. So for example, in terms of creating new cell lines, in terms of creating media that are low cost but expand quite well, as well as in creating scaffolds to form these three-dimensional structures. So the industry, in some senses, has settled into what this is called as this generic cultured meat workflow. And the idea is we start with the animal of interest. It could be a cow, a chicken, or duck, and other animals. And then a biopsy is taken. And from these biopsies, specific types of cells that are used for expansion are isolated. These could be muscle cells that can be expanded into different myocytes. It could be other cells like adipocytes or fat cells that could be used to create fat cells or to differentiate into other types of cells. And then you have a phase where these cells that have been extracted are enlarged millions or billions of times, so that you have a large population of cells to start out with, and then they are assembled into structured products where the tissue is replicated, or unstructured products more like minced meat, where they are combined with some binders, and using food extrusion technologies, they can be given a shape or a form. So having said that, there are a number of challenges that are still out there that spur both industry as well as academic researchers in this space. The primary of them is cost. The first burger that Mark Post made and demonstrated cost anywhere between $300,000 to $400,000 or so. That cost is considerably reduced. That now costs us lesser than $1,000 a burger. However, they're still far more than what an average burger does cost. And therefore, reducing the cost in the various aspects of the production is an important element. And the other one is scaling production up into very large sizes. Academically, there are a number of challenges. So, for example, creating cell lines that can be divided indefinitely is an important element, and these do not exist for a number of animal species that are of interest. Another element is that serum-based media is used to grow these cells and expand these cells, and one would like to have reduced serum or no serum in those media. Growth factors that enable the cells to grow aggressively are also not available in a low-cost form. So these are all areas which are of importance in terms of meeting the cost requirements. There are bioreactors available. Typically, these are bioreactors that are used in the pharmaceutical industry, and because of this, they are quite expensive. And therefore, lowering the cost of these bioreactors as well as scaling them up so that you can have larger production is also important, and research needs to be taken up in this area. And then finally, assembling these cells into a format where the taste and the texture of meat, of field-grown meat is produced is also an important area. Research has started and it's very nascent in this field, but still more effort is quite needed. And finally, assembled muscle-like tissues atrophy if they are not given external stimulation, and therefore providing some form of exercise like stretching them is likely important, and therefore bioreactors that can enable us to do this is also an important element of research in this space. So what we would like to see is more academic research, and this area historically has not been well funded because it doesn't fall into health, it doesn't fall into the traditional agricultural space, and therefore there has been a lack of funding. And so what we are trying to do is to promote the government and funding agencies to look into this area that has dramatically expanded in the past 10 years or so, but put more research infrastructure as well as funding so that academic research that benefits the entire community, both industry as well as the population, can be done. And there are a number of areas that are not tackled by the industry that academia can help. For instance, maintaining biodiversity of cellular sources, creating cell lines that are easy to access and openly accessible, looking at a close look at environmental impact of the technologies that are being developed, and as well as looking at biological effects of how these new growth media that we are trying to use affects the cells and the things that they produce, as well as the formats that we cultivate these meats, how do they affect the output of the cells that we are growing, are all important for the society. And this is something that the academia can do quite well. We can also partner with governmental agencies into coming up with new quality standards for cultivated meat, which do not exist at this time. And therefore, so my role has been to sort of promote this in Canada. And I'm sort of advocating for academic research and more input into such research which are long-term, which benefits society as well as the growing industry in Canada. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So that was very fascinating. To me, like the importance of looking at the history of things like this is really interesting, because we can see that the actual work on these things started, decades ago, while in the collective consciousness of it, this is a really new and groundbreaking thing. But we can clearly see that work has been ongoing, and we're ramping up now on a concept that has been around for a while. So I thought that was a really interesting take. Our next panelist, sorry, my French is sneaking in. Our next panelist is Lynn Blackwood. So Lynn Blackwood earned a degree in human nutrition from St. Francis Xavier University in Antigonish, Nova Scotia, and completed a dietetic internship at the Healthcare Corporation of St. John's in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador. Lynn has worked for the last 22 years in various roles relating to food and nutrition. Food security has always been at the core of her work, as well as her passion and professional interest. Lynn is one of the few Indigenous dietitians in Canada and a Nunatsiavut beneficiary. This makes her uniquely qualified to work as Food Security Program Manager with the Nunatsiavut government. Lynn is a board member of Dietitians of Canada and Canadian Foundation for Dietetic Research. So without further ado, I'll pass the mic over to Lynn.
Thank you, Renee-Claude, for that lovely introduction. So I'm really excited to be here today to speak to everyone around some of the work that I'm doing with the Nunatsiavut government. So I just want to get into into my slides here. So just a little bit about me, and as Renee-Claude said, I am a Nunatsiavut beneficiary and a registered dietitian. And I do love to cook, and as my mother would say, I'm a master of, a jack of all trades and master of none. So just to focus in on the Inuit Nunangat. So the Inuit Nunangat is 4 Inuit regions across Canada, and it's collectively known as Inuit Nunangat. The term Inuit Nunangat is the Canadian Inuit term for land, ice, and sea, and water. The Inuit consider the land, water, and ice of our homeland to be an integral part of our culture and our way of life. So the 4 Inuit regions in Canada are Nunavut, the Inuit Settlement region in the Northwest Territories, Makivik in northern Quebec, and Nunatsiavut in Newfoundland and Labrador. So this map here shows the Nunatsiavut communities in Labrador. And the Labrador Inuit Land Claims Agreement and the Labrador Inuit Constitution, which came into effect in December 1st of 2005, made Nunatsiavut the first of the 4 Inuit regions to achieve self-government. So you can see the 5 communities here. There's Nain, Hopedale, Postville, Makivik, and Rigolet. And the Nunatsiavut government, as a regional government within Newfoundland and Labrador, they represent the rights and responsibilities of the Aboriginal, constitutional, democratic, social, and human rights of the Labrador Inuit. So there are 7 departments which make up our government, and they include Nunatsiavut Secretariat, Nunatsiavut Affairs, Language, Culture, and Tourism, Land and Natural Resources, Education and Economic Development, Health and Social Development, which is the department that I work with, and finally, Finance and Human Resources and Information Technology. So just to tell you a little bit more about Nunatsiavut, the Nunatsiavut is accessible by air all year round, but is dependent upon the weather. The weather in Nunatsiavut has been impacted significantly by climate change. It has become very unpredictable. A few summers ago, no planes were able to land in the communities in Nunatsiavut. So with no planes, this affected everything in the community: the food system, the mail system, medical care. If anyone needed to be medevaced out of the community and the plane couldn't land, I mean, that really put people in jeopardy without being able to access medical care. So planes are a lifeline to communities in rural and remote communities. Nunatsiavut is also accessible by sea in the summer. Food and other goods are shipped to Nunatsiavut in the summer during the short shipping season. The shipping season generally begins the end of June or early July and runs until November. Now, this is dependent upon the ice, which can be different each year. So in order to make food available in the communities, stores must stock up for the long winter ahead. And so most stores will purchase the heavier food items, so canned goods, flour, UHT milk, just to name a few things. So anything that's going to be very heavy will be shipped up on the boat in the summertime. So some of the challenges with the boat system is that the infrastructure can be, some of it is in older condition and in need of repair. So the two pictures that I have there are the modes of transportation. So the top picture is the de Havilland Twin Otter, which is used all year round and can carry 20 passengers as well as freight. So there's been times when I've gone to the community and I think that it's a passenger plane, but there's freight on there. So there might be fresh produce and fruit there in front of me on the plane as I travel to the community. Below that is the Kamatik W, which is the boat that travels between Happy Valley Goose Bay and Points North, which services the communities in Nunatsiavut. Again, that carries passengers and freight, and any snowmobiles or trucks or any building materials, all of that stuff is transported on the boat during the summer. And finally, Nunatsiavut is accessible by snowmobile in the winter. So it's pretty common for family members to travel and visit each other in the wintertime by snowmobile, and they may be going to visit family or they may be sharing food. So what is food security? And this is the definition adopted in 1996 by the Food and Agriculture Association. So I'm just going to read it because it's pretty important to the work that I do. So food security exists when all people at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food to meet their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. So moving on to our next slide, I just want to touch about Deep Space Food Challenge. And it seems like everyone here today has talked about NASA and some of the impacts that NASA and space exploration has had on food. So I had the great opportunity to be a jury member for the Deep Space Food Challenge. And the whole goal of this food challenge was to develop innovative food technologies to grow nutritious food for space missions. And from my point of view, space and northern communities face similar challenges in growing food. So both can have a harsh climate, both can have a short growing season. There may be temperature issues. And again, some of my other panelists have spoken about this earlier. Another thing that may be unique to both space and northern communities is that they're very remote, and getting resupply or even equipment or even someone to come to the community or go to the moon or Mars to repair equipment. So having some unique, innovative technologies to grow food can really impact food security. So I just want to talk briefly about the dimensions of food insecurity. So food security can mean different things to different people. So just talking about the availability. Is the food physically available in the store or on the land? So caribou is the main source of protein for the Lauder Inuit. However, caribou from the George River caribou herd has been under a ban for the last 9 years. Now, this ban was put in place as a food management, or to manage the herd so that we could have future generations could have caribou, and as the herd numbers have decreased dramatically over the years. Accessibility. Do you have the resources or the opportunities and ability? Is the land safe to travel on? Traditional harvesting routes and hunting and gathering areas are no longer safe as they used to be. The thickness of ice is much less as it has been. Climate change, as I said earlier, has really impacted the north. Are there any barriers to getting to the store? Some communities, or most communities in the north, roadways aren't paved. There may be potholes or other things that may actually put physical barriers to you in accessing this store? Do you have transportation? Do you have equipment? So if you don't have a motorboat or a skidoo to go off on the land and harvest, that can affect your ability to access food from the land. If you're working, do you actually have the time to be able to go off and hunt and gather as you once did? So I'm just talking about use. Loss of knowledge and skills to revere and hunt and gather country food is occurring more and more. With this loss of skills and knowledge, it again has impacted food security. Elders may be in poor health and may not have the stamina to go off and hunt as they once did, and thus may not be able to pass on those skills to the younger generation. So quality. Oh, I can see my picture is a little bit affected here by, but is the quality of the food, is it that's available in the community, is it nutritious? Is it desirable? Is it food that people want to eat? If you're in a store and they may have things like zucchini, or for example, and it's not familiar to you, do people want to eat food that's not familiar to them? I think food has a big, important part around comfort as well. So you want to make sure that the food that is available is desirable. Is it culturally acceptable? Again, this is really important to Inuit. For example, I mentioned earlier about the herd on the George River Caribou Band. Moose, which has a similar nutrient profile as caribou, but it was not the norm of the protein that was eaten by Inuit. So we may be able to access moose, but it's not culturally acceptable. It may provide the nutritional needs, but again, it's not the norm or preferred food. So just a little bit about the food security rates within Nunatsiavut. And here on the slide is results from a 2-year study done in 2013 and 2014 by researchers from Trent University and also members from Guelph and McGill. The survey asked respondents a wide range of questions about the ability of households to afford food, as well as experiences with food over a 1-month period. Households were classified as food secure, marginally food secure, moderately food insecure, and severely food insecure. A total of 537 out of 722 households participated in the survey in the region. So results were then reported back to each community in 2017 through a series of public meetings and outreach events. So a total of 61.1% of households in Nunatsiavut were found to be food insecure. So this could include experiencing worry or difficulty in accessing food on a regular basis. So we did have the rates for each community, and I did list the communities earlier. So the food insecurity rates in Nain were 79.4%, in Hopedale 83.1%, Makkovik 35.1%, Postville 39.6%, and Rigolet 21.6%. So there was a wide range of food insecurity rates within the region. However, the region overall showed or reported the prevalence of food insecurity 4 times the level reported in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador at the same time, and 5 times the level of food insecurity measured in households in Canada. So what can we do to help with food security, and how can we improve it? So the graphic that's shown here is from the Inuit Nanangat Food Security Strategy, which was released in July of 2021. This long-awaited strategy provides a framework to improve food security in Inuit Nanangat. So as you can see from the graphic here, that food security is a complex issue, and not one action by itself will improve food security. So we can see that infrastructure, support for families and children's, food security programs and interventions, cost of living reduction measurements, and harvester support all intersect to help to improve food security in Inuit Nanangat, as well as the environmental factors, legislation, and policy. All of these things together can help improve Inuit self-determination over Inuit Nanangat's food system. So each region within Inuit Nanangat has programming in place to help improve food security. But as you can see, this is a complex issue, and much is needed to be done to help improve it. Within Nunatsiavut right now, all of our programs from the Department of Health and Social Development has a food component. These programming and these meals can make a big difference to some of the families in our community. As well, Nunatsiavut has dedicated food security staff. We're in the communities that have the greatest need. So within those regions right now, we are implementing a community food center model, which focuses on improving food literacy skills and land-based programming. So some of the things that we're doing in our land-based programming is working with elders and youth. Elders are able to pass on knowledge that they have around food, how to harvest, how to skin a seal, how to make boxes so that they can actually be able to procure the hide of the seal and store it properly for use later. All of those things are so important and need to be continued to be passed on to the younger generations so it won't be lost. How to clean birds and how to clean fish. All of these food literacy skills are essential in helping improving food security. So one other thing that I want to mention is that not only is country food important, but also the market food is important as well. So we need to find that balance between country food and market food so that we can move together and help to improve food security. So there's still much work to be done, and every community within Inuit Nanangat are working their own ways right now and using this framework to help improve it overall. So I could probably talk a lot longer, but I think we'll probably leave it there. So thank you so much. Nakomiki.
Thank you so much, Lynn. That was fascinating to see how food insecurity in remote locations, what that looks like, and what are the dimensions of it. I thought it was really interesting. The loss of traditional knowledge, how that really is a huge factor in food security. So thank you very much. Thank you to all of our speakers. This was really interesting perspectives, and they all kind of tie into each other very well. So before we move on to questions, we're just going to play a quick round of some questionable news. My anchor. So for this game, we are going to look at a couple of news headlines and try to determine which ones are in fact actual headlines, clickbait headlines, and which one is a plant. So one that isn't a real headline. The idea here isn't to determine which one has the real science, but more rather which one is a clickbait headline you would find online versus not. So we'll ask our speakers what they think, but feel free to participate in the comments and the chat and put your thoughts thoughts out there as well. So our first headline. So again, participants, our panelists, feel free. I might call you out for your opinion on this. Oops, it turns out lab-grown meat often contains real blood. So is this a real clickbait headline or not? Any thoughts? You can jump in.
I guess it's a clickbait worthy headline, not true, but
interesting. Okay, so Dr. Selvaganapathy says it might be a real headline, though the content of it. Thomas or Lynn, any comments on this?
I'd have to ask Ravi, where does the serum come from? What's the source of serum when you're making?
mostly bovine serum or horse serum. So those are the two often that's used.
All right. So I guess it depends what that is. So I said, I'd probably say clickbait, but
Okay. And Lynn, clickbait or a false, non-existent headline?
I'm thinking clickbait as well.
Well, you are all correct. So it is a real headline. So this was an article published by, let me just double check my notes. So I don't have the source right here. I'd have to go back in my tabs. So the essence of this one here is that they're saying that basically the serum that is used to grow the cells in, the medium in which our animal cells have to grow in, comes from fetal bovine blood. So maybe, Ravi, could you enlighten us real quick in like 2 lines or less what the science is here, if you're able to?
Yeah, so in biomedical research, the serum that is used is often fetal bovine serum, or in some cases horse serum is also used. And one of the challenges in the industry, and that is something that people have been used to, is to go serum-free media. So the chemically defined medium that doesn't contain any animal products in it. And there are some examples of most of the companies that are working on serum-free media. So the products that you see out there would be typically cultured in serum-free media rather than in this thing. So the origins do come from biomedical research, which uses serum, and that is one of the challenges scientifically that the industry has overcome.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so serum, from what I understand of serum, it's an extract from blood. We're not using actual blood, we're using a component of blood.
It's a component of blood. Yes.
Okay, there you go. So that was actually from Futurism. All right, our next one. Have we milked everything yet? The future of dairy-free milk. Real headline or invented? Lynn, what are your thoughts?
I have to giggle about that one. With so many non-dairy beverages out there, I think it's possible to be clickbait.
Yeah, okay. And Thomas, any thoughts?
it's probably clickbait, but the technology, I was talking about phyto farming, using tobacco plants to make proteins. You could take if you have the gene that codes for the protein that makes up the milk, in theory, you could put those genes in the plant and make them and extract it and make dairy-free milk.
Oh,
So probably clickbait, but it is possible.
All right. And Ravi.
I would say that could be a real headline. So there are technologies where they're using milk producing cells in order to culture them and produce. So it could be a real headline, yes.
All right, in our audience, I see real. Well, this one was actually a plant, so this was not a real headline, but as you all mentioned, this could be real. Actually, we were just reading this morning that they've come up with potato milk now. So as Lynn mentioned, all of these plant-based alternatives, we can add potato to it. Our last one before we jump into questions. Should crickets be on the menu now or just in the end times? Real headline or no? Ravi?
I guess real. I mean, crickets are already being consumed, so I don't see.
Yeah. Thomas?
Oh, absolutely. You can go to Zehrs and buy cricket flour.
Yep.
And if most of us, if we've eaten anything that's got a really red color to it, probably has ground up beetles in it. So,
Cockmeal.
yeah, there you go.
And Lynn, any thoughts on this?
Great source of protein. Why not?
Indeed. So this is indeed a real headline. So crickets are the next up and coming protein. So I was just saying before we started at the museum, we've featured some crickets in our programming and worked with a cricket farm to help our visitors understand that this is, a totally legitimate source of food. And even though, we might not be as familiar with it here in Canada, it's consumed all over the world, everywhere. So great. Okay,
Yeah, they're
so let's
incredibly
move.
efficient too.
What's that, sorry?
They're incredibly efficient from a water and energy conversion perspective too.
So we should definitely be eating them now, not just the end of times.
Absolutely gobble them up.
In my Cheerios in the morning. So we had a couple of great questions from the audience. So I'll try to field one to all of you here. So Thomas, we had some questions early on. So could you help us understand a little bit more about what waste in agriculture means and how vertical farming or indoor farming can help reduce that? I think there are a few questions that came up about what wastes are created in agriculture.
Yeah, well, I guess I would start with saying we're trying to get to maybe waste is the wrong word because they're really just resources, particularly in the space context. But for example, field production, okay, anything in a field, whatever's sold and taken off to be consumed leaves the field, it leaves that system. Everything else usually gets turned in and recycled through biodegradation and whatnot. But the same is true for controlled environment systems or plant factories or whatever terminology you want to use. You're putting a whole bunch of resources in to make the food, and a bunch of that leaves the stuff we eat. But in that context, these buildings, you don't turn it back into the soil, so you've got to find some way to do it. So we're looking at things like composting or some ways to recapture this carbon dioxide that you put in and the nutrients in the water, but also particularly in an urban environment, bringing some of those resources back in. I mean, you've shipped it off, people have eaten it, but you can bring waste back in to, top up because at least has left the system. Want to bring it back. So that's what I meant in terms of waste. It's, let's not call it waste.
Yeah, so waste is a resource essentially. So what I'm thinking is kind of like excess heat, for example, from the lights. Would that be considered a waste?
Yeah, well, it's used. So
Okay.
the light, the waste heat, right, that comes from the light is less that you have to use in your HVAC system, for example. No, the opposite can be, you can have too much and you actually have to cool. Same with all the water that's going through. There's a lot of misinformation or disinformation about the efficiency of these things. They say, we use 97% less water. Well, it depends how you look at it. In the case of a controlled environment, the plants are going through a lot of that water and you've got to condense it. Yes, it stays in the system unless you're blowing it out your windows, but you still have to condense it. And that's an energy intensive thing as well. So when I said at the end of things, we really got to nail down, energy is the big one because these are energy intensive systems. So.
That's actually a really great segue to a question that came in for Lynn about the idea of hydropower up in Labrador, and if that could be used to, run some large greenhouses or something of the type. Now, maybe Lynn, you could maybe take us through opportunities for this type of installation to help in food security in remote locations.
I do definitely think that that's something that could happen. However, in remote communities right now, everyone is running off of diesel. So there is opportunity, and there have been some studies done where Sorry if you hear my dogs barking in the background. Hopefully it's not too. But however, any like waste heat from any diesel generation could certainly fund power a greenhouse. Sorry, I don't know why they're going crazy.
It's all part of web diffusion. Okay, thank you. So Ravi, we've got a couple questions in about the nutritional content or the nutritional value of lab-grown meat, and also for indoor-grown plants as well. Is there, and maybe Lynn as well, you might have some insights into this, but is there much research going on into the nutritional aspects of these, these meats and vegetables grown with these new technologies? Are they more nutritious, less nutritious? What do we know so far about this? Maybe you start with Robbie.
Yeah, so I mean, this is an exciting area for research. So not much attention has been paid to sort of determine the nutritional content and to tune the nutritional content. But that is one capability that cultivated meat provides, is depending on the initial composition that we start with in formulating this, we could basically tune those contents. So one of the areas of research that we have done in the past is to change the ratios of muscle cells with fat cells, and that can be able you can tune the composition in that particular way. There have been thoughts in the past on incorporating certain nutrients as these cells grow, and therefore that is then incorporated into the meat that is produced. So those are all some possibilities that exist. But currently, I think the major challenge that people are facing is the high cost of the production of just muscle, right? And that associated with combining it with the taste and the texture has been sort of the main challenge that has been tackled. And then I think others would be taken up soon. And from an academic perspective, that is our interest, is to look at how the technology that we use and the media that we use then change not only the nutritional content, but also what the cells produce and how they respond, is of significant academic interest as well.
Okay, great, thank you. Thomas, is there anything you would add to this?
Certainly parallels quite a bit with what Ravi was saying. From a plant perspective, well, I'll use an example. A lot of people say, well, greenhouse grown tomatoes, they don't taste like anything. They're not as good as field grown. And there's some truth to that, because as I mentioned in my talk, plants integrate their entire environment, and they respond to that by making different things. And plants respond to stress. And if you give them a nice cushy environment, they're not stressed. So they're not making some of these compounds, which they use for other things, but we interpret as flavor. But we know that. So now we can start to look at what is quote unquote optimized, and we can apply those stresses in a very controlled fashion in these controlled environments. The result being, as I showed with those lettuce, we can quite accurate control the nutritional composition. We can make it better. We can amp up different things simply by changing the environment. A plant these are rough numbers, but it's the product of its genetics and its environment, same as we are. And if you can manipulate the environment, you can nurture. You can make a more healthy lettuce or anything else. Mm-hmm. Even just changing the color of the light will do that. So.
Right. That's perfect. And Lynn, do you have any thoughts related to this, like perhaps from the perspective of a dietitian and your current projects in your communities about hydroponically grown food, or any research you might be aware of that could speak to this?
We have done a few in the classroom grown, like tomatoes and that. I think it's an opportunity to get the children involved in growing food and that as well. So, growing tomatoes, I think when children are involved in the growing of food, they may be more interested in trying it. So, children a lot of times, if their parents don't eat vegetables, they don't want to eat them as well. So, sometimes I see positive peer pressure in my own experience from kids getting their friends are trying the vegetables that they grew, so someone else is going to try it, and I think that can have a great effect.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. It's a really interesting point. I mean, the future of food. One thing that I took back from your presentation is like the education aspect, the food literacy aspect, right? That falls into the future of food as well, or food security. So education is often an overlooked aspect of the conversation. Really interesting. I think we have time for like one more really quick question before I have to turn it over again. So why are these future food technologies complementary and not a replacement? Is it a cost benefit issue? Maybe over to you, Thomas.
I guess that's probably in response to my comment on the field production versus, well, again, I said maybe, so it certainly cost. But when you look at long-term crops, and there is some research to squish this down, but wheat, for example, can take 120, 150 days, a long time. To do that inside, well, just the energy cost is too much. So, and other things would be, you can do it, in space, you got to grow all these things, but root crops, things that store well, that you can ship. Probably, in terms of food security, probably wouldn't hit that too much either, because it can be done well outside. So it's complementary in the sense that there are things that we should and could bring into indoor production, things that are some issues of food safety. There was a whole slew of recalls on romaine lettuce, for example, and people were dying. And that was largely a field contamination issue. Well, if you're doing it indoors where these 10 things don't touch the produce, then you go a long way to avoid that. So there are lots of reasons to make the shift for some things, but not all. Certainly not wheat and corn and stuff like that. Again, maybe down the road, but not today.
And Lynn, do you have any thoughts concerning this, maybe from like what could be lost culturally, perhaps, if we replace,
Yeah, I think, as I was saying earlier, our elders are, they no longer, they're passing away and they're not passing on that traditional knowledge. And so if those skills are lost, how are we going to get it back? So I don't think I'm really answering your question here, but with the loss of skills and knowledge, I think it's a huge disadvantage. And so I think we need to marry the technology with our traditional ways. And I think by doing that, we will be successful in the future with food.
And to wrap us all up, Ravi, any thoughts on why this maybe lab cultured meat wouldn't replace all of our meat?
I think, the evidence is quite clear, right? We are running out of land to satisfy the human demand for meat as is, right? And then in the future, if more countries such as India and Africa grow to a stage where there is lots of disposable income, meat consumption is going to grow. And so often, as with energy technologies, new one is never going to replace the old one per se, but it is just going to add on to that. There are benefits and limitations to both of these technologies, and complementarily they can satisfy the overall demand as it is growing. So I don't see much in the sense it is going to solve a problem that is unsustainable at the moment.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much to all three of you for your fabulous perspectives on this topic and for answering these questions so perfectly. I think it offers some really good context for our viewers. And I think this was a really great conversation to kind of have us look at the future of food maybe a little bit more broadly than we were before we came in here. And I'm very excited for the Googling to come. I have a lot of questions of my own now. So many thanks. And I will pass this over back to Suzanne, who will wrap this up with you.
Thanks so much. And thanks all our speakers. And thanks especially to Renee Claude, who's been a fantastic host. Thomas, Ravi, Lynn, what a wonderful discussion. We hope you all enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. Personally, I'm starving now. I really need to go have a snack. Please share your feedback with us. Let us know what you'd like to see from us in the future. There's a link in the chat box. And if you can, consider supporting our free programming. Visit rciiscience.ca/donate for more information. Also a link in the chat box. Next month, we're delving into the science of weather. If there's anything Canadians like to talk about more than food, it is weather. So we are going to be looking at short-term forecasting, storm chasing, extreme weather events, and long-term weather monitoring. Obviously important for the future of food as well, as we learned today. Details about all of our upcoming events can be found on our website, which is rciiscience.ca/what's on. Again, link in the chat box. And if you want early updates on what's coming next, please subscribe to our newsletter and like and subscribe. Thanks so much to everyone for joining us today. See you next time. Bye.